He was broke at 40. No investors, no breakthrough idea, no story that made people lean in and say, "This guy's going to make it." By that age, most people have already picked a side. Either they've made it, or they've quietly accepted that they never will. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That moment, the one where everything feels too late, is actually the perfect starting point. From childhood, we're sold a very specific story about success. We're shown the outlier cases, the 22-year-old who built a billion-dollar app, the one-hit wonder who changed their life with a single idea, the overnight success that somehow skipped the struggle part entirely. These stories are emotional, they're inspiring, and they're dangerously misleading. Because they create the illusion that money comes from inspiration, from a brilliant flash, a clever concept, a moment of genius. But strip away the noise, and you'll find something far less exciting, but far more reliable. Most real wealth isn't built on ideas. It's built on repetition, not on what's new, on what returns. And that's where the real opportunities hide. Not in the places everyone's watching, but in the places no one wants to stay. In the businesses that don't look good on social media. In the models that don't get talked about at dinner parties. In the quiet, stubborn routines that keep paying month after month while everyone else is chasing the next big thing. When this man turned 40, he had one advantage that can't be bought. He stopped trying to impress. He stopped looking for something that sounded exciting. He started looking for something that worked, even if it was boring. That shift changes everything. Because the moment you stop chasing inspiration and start chasing repeatability, the market stops looking like chaos and starts looking like structure. Fewer illusions, more patterns, less noise, more signal. And if you look closely at where money actually moves, you'll notice something strange. It's not concentrated where the most attention is. It's concentrated where the most routine is. This isn't a new observation. Michael Gerber, in his book, The E-Myth Revisited, points out one of the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make. They fall in love with doing the work, not with building the system. They want to do something interesting instead of something reproducible. And that's the trap. Because interesting things are hard to repeat. And hard to repeat things are hard to scale. That's why so many brilliant ideas die before they ever become businesses. They require constant creativity, constant attention, constant involvement from the owner. They run on energy, and energy runs out. Boring models, on the other hand, barely require inspiration at all. They require discipline, and that makes them stronger. The man who started from zero at 40 didn't try to create something unique. He did the opposite. He chose what already
When it comes
worked,
to getting things
what
clean,
people already needed, what they were already paying for. Instead of trying to be first, he decided to be consistent. That sounds almost disappointing, but that's exactly
these new
where the real
workstations
advantage
are designed
begins.
to boost productivity.
Because while thousands of people chase attention, a handful quietly occupy positions in niches where demand already exists and isn't going anywhere. They don't create trends, they serve reality, and reality repeats.
Leave me alone!
People keep getting their spaces dirty, machines keep breaking, businesses keep needing maintenance, space keeps costing money, time keeps being limited.
I told you this
Each of
wouldn't
these
work.
isn't an idea. It's a constant problem, and that means a constant source of income. Which leads to the question that changes the entire game. If money doesn't come from genius, but from repetition, then where exactly are the strongest points of that repetition hiding? There's a lie we're all taught, subtly but consistently, from the moment we start thinking about making money, that the bigger the idea, the bigger the payout. That if you just find the right concept, the right angle, the right innovation, everything else will fall into place. But if you look at the actual
it steady.
architecture of wealth,
Bring 'em
not the
down here
Instagram
now.
version, not the podcast version, but the real one, you'll notice something almost boring. Money doesn't flow to the best ideas. It flows to the most repeated actions, not to the flashiest, to the most consistent. This is where most people get stuck. They spend years searching for the perfect business, the one that feels exciting, meaningful, unique. They want something they can talk about with pride. something that makes sense in a bio, something that doesn't feel like a compromise. And while they're searching, someone else is quietly collecting payments for doing the same unglamorous thing over and over for years. That's the real engine of wealth.
These graphs
not
clearly
breakthroughs, not virality, not inspiration, repetition. Because repetition creates predictability. Predictability creates cash flow. And cash flow, steady, reliable, recurring, is what turns a job into an asset. Think about it. When you do something once, you get paid once. When you do something that repeats,
it just
you get
keeps
paid
coming.
on a schedule.
Make it stop.
And when
I
you
can't
build a
handle
system
all-
around that repetition, you stop trading time for money altogether. You start collecting from a structure you built. This is the core of what makes boring businesses so powerful. They don't rely on being exciting. They rely on being necessary. And necessity, by definition, repeats. People don't wake up excited to pay for cleaning services. But they do wake up to dirty offices, stained carpets, and cluttered spaces. They don't dream about paying for storage, but they do accumulate more than their homes can hold. They don't get emotional about laundry, but they wear clothes every day. These aren't desires, they're demands. And demand, especially recurring demand, is the closest thing to automatic income that exists. The problem is that most people aren't wired to see this. They're wired to chase novelty, to look for the thing that feels fresh, to believe that if it's not new, it's not valuable. But markets don't pay for new. They pay for solved problems. And the best problems to solve aren't the ones that appear once. They're the ones that come back again and again, like clockwork. This is why the most profitable businesses often look so ordinary. They don't try to be loved. They try to be needed. And once you understand that, the entire landscape changes. You stop asking, "What's the coolest thing I could do?" and start asking, "What's the thing people will keep paying for, even if they don't love it?" That shift, from excitement to necessity, is where real opportunity begins. Because excitement fades, necessity doesn't. And when you build on necessity, you're not betting on trends. You're betting on human behavior, on the fact that people will keep getting their spaces dirty, that machines will keep breaking, that businesses will keep needing the same services, month after month, year after year. That's not glamorous, but it's reliable. And reliability is the foundation of everything that scales. This is also where the myth of the passive income gets corrected. Nothing is truly passive. But some things are predictable, and predictability is the next best thing. When you know with reasonable certainty that a customer will return in 30 days, you're not guessing. You're planning. You're building on a base that compounds. One client becomes 10. 10 becomes 100. 100 becomes a territory. And somewhere along the way, the business stops feeling like a series of tasks and starts feeling like a system. That's the moment everything changes. Because now, you're not just doing work. You're owning a machine that produces results, with or without your daily involvement. And that's the real definition of leverage. But here's the next question, and it's the one that separates theory from execution. If repetition is the key, which niches have the strongest, most built-in repetition? There's a filter that protects the best opportunities, and it's not skill, capital, or connections. It's discomfort. When a business looks dirty, physically demanding, monotonous, or socially unprestigious, something powerful happens. The crowd disappears. Most people self-select out. They don't even consider it. They scroll past. They laugh. They say, "That's not for me." And that's exactly where the money hides. Because when the crowd disappears, profits aren't split among hundreds of hungry newcomers all chasing the same easy thing. What's left is a field where the winners aren't the loudest or the most creative. They're the ones who can stay calm, systematic, and consistent, while everyone else is looking for something more glamorous. This is one of the most underrated rules in business. If it feels too uncomfortable for most people, it's often too protected for you. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a viral post about someone's janitorial route? Or a motivational reel about commercial waste management? Or a TED Talk on dumpster logistics? Exactly. And that's the point. These businesses don't get attention. They get paid. They solve common, annoying, everyday problems that don't go away. They don't need public adoration. They need local demand. They don't need viral marketing. They need contracts, routes, regularity, and returning customers. Most people ignore these models because they don't seem inspiring enough. But the market never promised to pay for inspiration. It pays for the relief of inconvenience, for solving a problem that comes back again and again. Cleaning is a perfect example. Nobody dreams of owning a cleaning business. Teenagers don't put "start a cleaning company" on their vision boards. Influencers don't post day-in-the-life reels from inside a supply closet. And that's precisely why it works. People want clean homes, clean offices, clean facades, and they don't want it once. They want it constantly. One-time work is just income. A repeat client is the engine. When you have enough of those clients, the business stops feeling like a series of small tasks and starts behaving like a cash flow system. That's the power of a boring model. It doesn't create excitement. It creates predictability. Michael Gerber, in the E-Myth Revisited, explains why this matters so much. An owner who remains trapped in the daily grind doesn't build an asset. An owner who turns a simple service into a process creates a structure that can survive without their constant involvement. This is the difference between busyness and wealth. Busy people often feel important. But it's the system owners who ultimately earn money without being physically tied to every task. Boring businesses are particularly strong because the process itself is usually easy to understand. And that's more important than it seems. When the model is clear, it's easier to hire, train, monitor, and scale. You don't need complex theory. You need a reliable execution cycle. A client contacts. The task is planned. The service is delivered. The invoice is issued. The client returns. This cycle can work for years if the business consistently solves the same problem. Simplicity in business isn't a weakness. Simplicity allows you to repeat an action until it turns into profit. And this is where the magic of recurring revenue comes in. A one-time service is money. A regular service is the base. One cleaning is labor. 10 monthly clients are already a foundation. Once a business reaches this rhythm, the owner can start thinking like an investor, not a firefighter. They no longer chase every new deal from scratch. They manage a system that brings in money on schedule. This is what makes a boring business so attractive to those who want freedom, not applause. Walker Deibel, in Buy Then Build, reinforces this line of reasoning. Many of the best businesses aren't the newest ones, but those that already have proven demand, customers, and cash flow. This aligns perfectly with the boring business approach, because in such industries, you often don't need to invent the market. You just need to master it better. A cleaning company becomes valuable not because it invented cleaning, but because it turned cleaning into a stable, understandable, and regularly billable service. The same applies to many other unattractive niches. There's also a psychological advantage. When a business is boring, the owner spends less time feeding the ego and more time focusing on the foundation. They start focusing on retention, routes, response times, process simplicity, upselling, and execution discipline. These aren't glamorous topics, but they are what builds sustainable income. In flashy businesses, too much energy is spent on appearing successful. In boring ones, it's on actually becoming one. The takeaway here is simple. Choose not what looks interesting, but what repeats naturally. Choose a model where demand returns on its own, where the process can be standardized, and where the customer is willing to pay again and again to avoid having to solve the same problem themselves. Which leads to the next unavoidable question. Which boring businesses have the strongest built-in repeatability? And why do they create the feeling of almost automatic income? There's a shift that happens when you stop thinking like a seller and start thinking like an access owner. It seems small. It changes everything. Because once you understand that people are willing to pay simply for the opportunity to get the right solution at the right time, you stop looking for dramatic products and start looking for pressure points. You begin to see where demand accumulates quietly, where convenience has a price, and where the lack of an option creates profits for the first mover. This is why some ordinary businesses become surprisingly powerful. They don't sell delight, they sell relief, and relief is one of the most reliable currencies in commerce. A customer in a hurry, a customer in discomfort, a customer without an alternative, a customer who needs it right now. These aren't people looking for a beautiful story. They're people looking for the fastest way back to normal. That's why businesses built on repeated inconvenience can be incredibly profitable. They sit right in the middle of frustration and offer an easy way out. This is where the most underrated operators come in. They don't think about how impressive a business looks. They think about how useful it is at a pain point. This is a much more profitable question. A machine in the right place, a service on the right route, a contract with the right client, a location with the right flow. These are all different versions of the same idea. You don't create demand. You capture it. And when you understand this, the entire market becomes much clearer. This clarity is also important because boring businesses thrive not on drama, but on structure. The better the system, the less the owner has to live in constant tension. The more predictable the demand, the easier it is to standardize service delivery. This is why Michael Gerber's insight from the E-Myth Revisited remains so powerful. A business becomes real when it operates as a system, not as a reflection of the owner's mood. If a company relies solely on your presence, it's fragile. If it relies on process, it can scale. When you look at it through this lens, it becomes clear why many small businesses are actually very smart assets. A laundry room isn't just a room with machines. It's a place people return to because the need never goes away. A parking lot isn't just empty space. It's managed convenience in a dense location. Storage isn't just boxes. It's a solution to the problem modern life creates itself, forcing people to store more than they can fit at home. Each of these businesses succeeds not because they're beautiful, but because they exist at the intersection of necessity and repetition. Walker, Diebel, and Buy Then Build reinforces this point. If a business already has repeat demand, the smartest strategy is often not invention, but acquisition and improvement. And this is especially powerful here because many boring businesses already have their main asset, habit. Customers don't buy once. They come back because the need reoccurs. And when a business is built into habit, you're no longer fighting for attention every day. You're leveraging routine. This is one of the most underrated forms of leverage in business. The beauty of this model is that it grows quietly. It doesn't need a huge audience. It doesn't need a massive brand. It doesn't need a viral moment. It needs the right address, the right problem, the right process, and enough consistency to continue generating revenue. That's why many such businesses look boring on the outside and feel almost unfair on the inside. The owner sees what others don't. Every recurring problem is a chance to get paid again. Every regular need is a door back to the customer. Every predictable pain is a chance to build a sustainable money machine. And here's the key takeaway. The best boring businesses aren't built on persuasion. They're built on inevitability. People need them, come back, and pay again because the problem keeps coming back. This kind of revenue is powerful because it doesn't rely on novelty. It relies on human behavior remaining remarkably stable. And it's this stability that takes us to the next level, the moment when a service ceases to be just a service and begins to transform into a system that almost runs itself. At a certain point, a business stops being just a service and starts driving itself. That's when a boring business becomes truly dangerous, in the best possible way. Because the owner is no longer simply doing work for money. They're building a structure that continues to generate income with ever-decreasing friction. From the outside, people often see only routine. They see repetition, a simple service, a standard operating procedure. But the owner sees accumulation. Every repeated task strengthens the system. Every returning client stabilizes the base. Every small improvement makes the next month easier than the last. That's the hidden beauty of a strong, boring business. It doesn't require constant reinvention to grow. It grows when it becomes more organized, more predictable, and more efficient than it was before. One route becomes 2. One crew becomes 3. One regular customer becomes 10. One repeatable service becomes a reliable machine. And once such a machine exists, the owner begins to do the most important thing in business: remove themselves from the center of every problem. This isn't laziness. This is architecture. This is where Michael Gerber's insight from the E-Myth Revisited hits the nail on the head. A business becomes a true enterprise when it operates on a system, not on the owner's personal adrenaline. If the owner remains a bottleneck, the company can't breathe freely. When processes are established, the team is trained, standards are defined, and quality is maintained without constant manual oversight, the business begins to behave like an asset. And this is the turning point. Small business ceases to mean small future. That's why boring businesses often scale quietly, not through fame, through reliability. Reliability makes hiring easier, increases customer retention, makes forecasting more accurate. It also reduces the emotional burden on the owner. You stop living in, "Today is the day." You start reading the system. And the system doesn't understand moods, trends, or ego. It only knows input, output, and consistency. And that's a much better playing field for the long game. Walker Deibel adds an important insight to this in Buy Then Build. When a business already has proven demand, it's often more profitable to improve rather than create. In a boring business, improvement is everything. You improve dispatching, you improve payment collection, you improve follow-up, you improve communication, you improve training. You improve margins by making the same service cleaner and faster. And because the service is repeated, the effect of these improvements accumulates. It is in this accumulation that wealth is created. A psychological advantage is no less important than a financial one. When a business becomes predictable, the owner gains the ability to think long-term. They stop treating each day as a threat. They can plan, invest, expand, without feeling constantly in chaos, and this improves the quality of their decisions. Discipline in pricing, hiring, and growth improves, and it is precisely this discipline that distinguishes a business that simply churns through from one that truly builds capital. That's why many such companies are stronger than they appear. They're built not on a single brilliant event, but on consistent human behavior. People continue to need the same things. Buildings continue to require maintenance. Customers continue to return. Problems continue to recur. And if a business is structured to effectively capture these recurring needs, the result isn't flashy, but it's powerful. It pays. It accumulates. It stabilizes the owner's life more than most flashy models. And there's a final important takeaway. The best boring businesses become almost invisible because they work too well. They stop demanding constant attention. And that's precisely what makes them valuable. A business that doesn't require drama, heroism, or constant reinvention isn't boring in the bad sense. It's boring in the most profitable sense of the word. Which leads to the final step, showing how all this turns into not just stability, but an almost automatic flow of money when the owner no longer carries everything on their own, but receives results from their own system. At some point, the owner realizes that the most valuable thing in a business is no longer the service itself. What matters most is repetition, system, the calm predictability of income. That's when it becomes clear. A boring business can be not just stable, but almost automatic if it's built correctly. This is the final form of this story. Not flashy, not showy, but very powerful, because when the system works, money begins to appear not through daily stress, but through accumulated order. At this point, the business stops asking the owner for constant heroism. It begins to demand architecture. And this is a fundamentally different level. When processes are documented, when the team understands what to do, when repetitive tasks are standardized, the owner ceases to be the center of every action. They become a system manager, not a person manually saving the day. This is true freedom in a boring business. Not the absence of work, but the absence of chaos. Michael Gerber, in The E-Myth Revisited, talks about exactly this. A business should function as a system, not as a reflection of the owner's personality. If the owner is the sole driver, scale quickly becomes limited by their strength. If a business is built on processes, it can operate without constant emotional input. This is especially important for boring models because it is in them that repetition becomes a source of strength. The less improvisation, the greater the resilience. The greater the resilience, the easier it is to build long-term cash flow. At the same time, the very logic of growth in a boring business is very mature. Miracles aren't expected here. Here, small improvements add up to big results. A slightly better route, a slightly faster application processing, a slightly more accurate schedule, a slightly more disciplined payment collection, a slightly more attentive retention, a slightly better staff training. Each of these steps seems small on its own, but together they create a business that runs smoother, cleaner, and more profitable. That's how autopilot is created. Not by magic, by discipline. Walker Deibel adds an important insight to this in Buy Then Build. If a business is already making money, the best path is often not to start something new, but to buy and improve. This is especially true for boring industries because their main asset is the existing pipeline. You don't need to reconvince the market. You need to optimize what's already been bought from reality. And this is precisely what makes boring businesses so interesting for those who value results, not noise. There's another psychological layer that's often overlooked. When a business is predictable, the owner begins to think strategically rather than reactively. They stop fearing every slow day because they see the system as a whole. They can plan months in advance. They can think about hiring, expansion, new locations, selling the business as an asset, and this is no longer simply working for yourself. It's building an infrastructure that over time begins to work for you. So the main idea behind this whole topic is very simple. Boring businesses don't win because they're impressive. They win because they repeat. And if repetition is built into the model itself, over time it becomes sustainability, and sustainability becomes freedom. This is why the quietest businesses often last longer, fail less often, and ultimately generate more revenue than the flashiest projects that fizzle out at the start. The takeaway from this chapter and the entire story is this. Don't look for the business that screams the loudest. Look for one that can be built into a system, repeated without unnecessary drama, improved year after year, because it's often where everything seems too simple, too ordinary, too boring, that true wealth begins.